Hi everyone, welcome to our fall and winter seasonal vegetables cooking class. Thank you for your patience as we had to transition this class to be virtual only today. So I appreciate you being here and I apologize that you won't get to taste the samples, but I assure you they're pretty tasty and hopefully you'll still give these recipes a try. So we usually do a fall and winter seasonal vegetables class, usually in time for the holidays in the fall and winter. The idea is that these are recipes that you could bring to a holiday gathering. And today I'm going to do some simpler fall and winter seasonal vegetables that you could just make on a regular weeknight too. So last year we did uh, what I think of as showstopper big stuffed vegetables, like an entire stuffed vegetable. So there was a stuffed cabbage cake and a stuffing stuffed pumpkin. So those were a little more labor intensive, but meant for special occasions. And then the year before, we did other impressive vegetable centerpieces, which were a mushroom Wellington and a whole roasted cauliflower. So this year we're going simpler. And the reason why we have these seasonal vegetable classes is that seasonal vegetables tend to be at their peak in terms of flavor, nutrition. They can be purchased locally, and they tend to be more affordable because they're in season and don't have to be shipped from far away, which is better for the environment as well. So if you're not sure what's in season, because we do live in this world where you can get pretty much anything you want all the time, then you could just go to the farmer's market and see what's available because everything there should be grown locally. And or if you go to the grocery store, it might tend to be the things that are featured or on sale that week. So this week or this month, I guess we use classes monthly. We're going to be using some winter squash, like honey nut squash, which is similar to butternut, pomegranates, and carrots, which are pretty much available year round, but have kind of two main growing seasons in the spring and fall. Let's get started. So we're going to start with the carrot recipe, and the recipes are linked in the BCal. And this recipe is for roasted carrots, specifically Moroccan spiced carrots. I actually went to Morocco this year and took a cooking class and hoped to bring back some recipes, but unfortunately, they didn't give us any of the recipes. But we made a lot of dishes, and they did use a lot of the same spices and all the different vegetables. So, what we're going to use today is paprika, the ginger, let me get the recipe out, cinnamon, turmeric, cumin, salt, of course, and optional is a little bit of cayenne pepper for spice, but you can leave that out if you don't like it spicy. So we're gonna put those on in a minute. But first, what we're gonna do is prepare the carrots. So I know many of you have probably heard in the news, I think it was just a couple days ago, came out that there was a huge recall for carrots. So those carrots should not be available in the grocery store anymore. Um, and I did just buy these yesterday at Berkeley Bowl. So the recipe calls for 1 pound of carrots. And I think people might be interested in talking about food safety after this big recall. And with the holidays coming up, I think that's a good time to talk about food safety because we tend to have a lot of leftovers and food gets left out for a long time. So there are some important reminders for food safety. Okay, so if you do buy carrots with the greens attached, I know they look really cute and fun, but you should actually remove them from the greens pretty quickly, probably as soon as you get home from the store, because the greens actually cause the carrots to dry out. So I left them on just to show this and because I just bought them last night. And there are recipes for carrot tops. You could use it, it looks kind of similar to parsley. You can make a pesto out of it. There's a few, I don't really have any recipes because I usually don't buy them with the greens on, but if that's something you're interested in, it's a nice way to reduce waste. But if not, you can just compost them. Okay, so we are going to peel these carrots to remove the outer skin. And you don't have to peel carrots if you're going to cook them, but I'm going to just to make sure we're getting all the dirt off. These carrots weren't as thoroughly washed as the ones that you buy in the bags, so it's a little harder to get all the dirt off. So we're just gonna peel them. And this recipe is for roasted carrots, and I know we've done some other roasted carrot recipes, but it's with a different spice mix and like a different shape. So we do have other carrot recipes if you're interested. Carrots are very affordable. They last a long time in the refrigerator. They can last a few weeks. They're very nutritious. They're easy to find. So we have recipes like ranch roasted carrots. We have roasted carrots and parsnips. And other recipes that aren't roasted are things like carrot pancakes and carrot soup. So those are some recipes where carrots are really the star of the show. And I'm sure we have tons more where carrots are just one of the many ingredients. And what we're going to add to this recipe, which is optional, is this zesty garlic yogurt dip. So you can leave that out, but it does just kind of elevate this recipe a bit, especially if you are making it for, say, the holidays. Okay, so let's see. Always have a lot of things I want to say about each recipe, and I need reminders so I can't multitask too much. But again, this is the fall and winter vegetable class, and carrots are available year round, but the main growing season means they're most available in the late spring and fall. So you can think of them as both a spring and a fall vegetable. And they have lots of beta carotene, which is an antioxidant and a precursor to vitamin A. And I saw there's a question about nutrients in the skin. The skin is so thin, I think probably the nutrients in the skin are quite similar to the nutrients in the carrot itself. So you could leave it on, but it's kind of more of a texture preference. Okay. So we got all our little carrots ready to go. Especially with these little carrots that you might find at the farmer's market or the grocery store in a bunch, you could roast them just like this with a little bit of the green attached and whole, and it looks very cute if that's what you are going for. They'll just take a little longer to cook, probably like 45 minutes to an hour. So what we're going to do is we're going to bake them on a baking sheet, and I lined it with a silicone baking mat, which is an alternative to parchment paper. It's nice just because it's reusable, but if you do use parchment paper, that is compostable. So if you have compost where you live, then just be sure to throw that into the compost rather than the trash can. Okay, so I'm cutting off those little ends there. And now we're just going to cut them into big chunks. So lots of different ways you can cut your carrots, but I'm going to just cut off the ends. And this recipe is from a website called Minimalist Baker. And what they did was cut the carrots into big, long, diagonally cut pieces, kind of like that. So it says to cut them into diagonal into 1 or 1.5 inch pieces. Those might be more like 2 inches, but that's okay. We're just going to cut them like that. You can cut them a little bit thinner to make sure that they cook quickly because we want these to be done in we want them to be cut evenly enough so that they cook evenly, and we want them to cook in 25 minutes. Especially because we also have to roast the squash and the shallots for our next recipe. So I'm going to get these in the oven pretty quickly. One of our roasted carrot recipes actually uses baby carrots, which is nice because then they're already cut into small pieces. You just kind of dump them out and toss them with your seasonings and roast them. So that is an alternative if you want a really quick weeknight vegetable. And then what we're going to do is add the olive oil to the pan and just mix it on the pan with all the spices. Okay, so what else do we want to say? Yeah, the beta carotene in the carrots is related to the color of the carrots, the orange. So beta carotene is also found in other orange and yellow vegetables, including winter squash, which we're using today with the honey nut squash, and sweet potatoes. That's why it's good to include a variety of colors of vegetables and fruit in your diet. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the recall. So there was a big recall for organic carrots from one company for both baby carrots and whole carrots. And they were probably available for purchase from mid-August to October 23rd. So they should not be in stores anymore. You can, if you want more details, you can look up the recall. But the carrots or the baby carrots that were recalled did have a best by date. I don't remember what it is, but you can look that up. So they were contaminated with E. coli and people got sick in a lot of different states. And I know there was at least one death, but with widespread foodborne illness, usually the number of reported cases is much lower than the actual number of cases, right? Because maybe people got sick and just recovered on their own, never went to the doctor. So we don't really know how many people were impacted. E. coli can, uh, there's a bunch of different types of E. coli, and some are not harmful. But the type that was found in these carrots, I'm going to do 2 tablespoons of oil, was a pathogenic type of E. coli, and infections can cause diarrhea, urinary tract infections, pneumonia, sepsis, and other illnesses. And symptoms usually occur 3 to 4 days after the bacteria is consumed. And most people do recover on their own in 5 to 7 days. E. coli, similar to other bacteria, is killed by heat, but it can survive up to 160 degrees. So that's why it's important to cook leftovers and a lot of foods to 165. Okay, so I'm going to start adding the spices. So we have 2 tablespoons of oil. I used um, grapeseed oil. I think the recipe calls for avocado. You can use avocado oil if you want. It tends to be kind of expensive. So grapeseed is a little more affordable, or you could use olive oil. And these carrots are heavily spiced. So if you want more of a plain carrot, then you could just do oil, salt, and pepper. But the whole point is that they kind of have these Moroccan spices. So we added so far a teaspoon of smoked paprika and a teaspoon of cumin. Now we're going to add some turmeric, 1/4 teaspoon. And a 1/4 teaspoon of ground ginger. And then 1/8 teaspoon of ground cinnamon. So I'm just going to dump them on the pan and then mix it all together later. Teaspoon of cinnamon, or sorry, 1/8 teaspoon of cinnamon. Make sure that's the right one. And I like food a little spicy, so I'm going to go ahead and add some cayenne pepper. I'm just going to sprinkle it on there because I'm not too worried about the spice. And then a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Okay, this is a little messy, so be careful when you do this, especially the turmeric that can stain. Probably a lot of these spices can stain. So if you wanted to be a little neater, you could do this in a bowl and then dump it onto the baking sheet, but that just creates more dishes to wash, so I'm gonna just do it this way. And then we're gonna make sure that they're spread out on the pan. When you roast vegetables, you don't want them to be too crowded because then they won't get crisp because vegetables have a lot of water, so they kind of will steam each other. So you want everything to have a little bit of space to create some airflow in the middle. Okay, so I need to wash our hands. You could also use a flat baking sheet, like a cookie sheet, and that will create more space for airflow. But I only have two baking sheets and I'm using the flatter one for the squash. So we'll make it work. All right. We need to get that into our 375-degree oven for 20 to 25 minutes. I'm going to start it at 20 and then we'll check it. So we just want the carrots to be tender and slightly browned. And then we'll make the sauce later. Okay, so just a couple of other things about E. coli. Um, how does food get contaminated? And while we do that, I'm going to get started on the next recipe. With this honey nut squash, I'm just going to start peeling it. Yeah, E. coli can come from a lot of different sources. It lives in the intestines of a lot of animals, so it can come from animals, from their waste, or when meat is made in that process, it can come out of the intestines. It can be in the environment. It can come from somebody handling the food who didn't wash their hands properly. There's a lot of different ways that food can get contaminated, but we do have a very industrialized food system, and that means that when food goes from one facility to the next to be processed for different steps, each time that happens, it's another opportunity for the food to get contaminated. Overall, we do still have a very safe food system, but it's hard for it to be, 100% safe all the time. Okay, so the recipe that we're making now is called Fall Bliss Salad. This is from a website called Smitten Kitchen, and my friend made it last year for Friendsgiving, so I thought it was really good and pretty simple. Um, so I thought that we would make it here today too. And something that makes it special is going to be the roasted honey nut squash and the pomegranate seeds. That's just going to take it up a notch. It makes it a little bit more labor intensive, but again, since we have the holidays coming up, I thought it would be nice to do some kind of special recipes. So the recipe calls for 1 pound of honey nut squash, and I measured this one. It was maybe just under a pound. So you might be wondering, what is honey nut squash? It's actually kind of like a hybrid of butternut squash. And I don't know if you can tell on the camera, but it tends to be darker in color. If you see it at the grocery store, even the outside is a darker color than butternut. And you can probably tell it's also quite a bit smaller, which is great for this recipe because butternut squash can be like, this big. And unless you're using it, this recipe is just kind of a topping, right? So we don't need a huge butternut squash that weighs 3 pounds or anything. So this is just a little bit more manageable. We're going to just go ahead and use the whole thing. So we're going to roast it in thin slices. The recipe says 1/4 inch. So probably about like that, if you can see. And that means it'll cook really quickly and will get like some caramelization going on the outside. So it'll look nice and have a nice texture. And what we're also going to do is roast some shallots along with the squash, and then those will get pureed into the dressing, but they'll have that extra flavor coming from the roasting process. Okay, so you can see that similar to butternut squash, it has some seeds. And I don't know if you can see that color. It's quite a bit darker than butternut squash, I would say. It's a nice, rich color. So again, like with the carrots, the orange color is associated with the beta carotene. So compared to butternut squash, honey nut squash has a bit more of that beta carotene. It also has a little bit of a stronger and sweeter flavor. And similar to butternut squash, it also has fiber, vitamin C, and potassium. The skin is thinner than butternut squash, so it is edible if you want, but it's also okay just to peel it and skip that part. So honey nut squash, butternut squash, and other types of winter squash are in season in the fall and winter. They can be harvested late summer through midwinter, but some are available year round. Like you probably will see butternut squash year round. This is not a very sharp spoon, so it's hard to get the last little bits. So other types of winter squash are acorn, spaghetti, delicata, kabocha, blue Hokkaido, pumpkins. Those are all different types of winter squash. And when you're choosing them at the store or farmer's market or roadside stand, things to look for are squash that are heavy for their size. And in honey nut squash in particular, we want a deep orange skin, no green patches. If it starts to wrinkle, then it's probably starting to go bad. And because the skin is thinner than butternut squash, it's not going to last quite as long. So store it in a cool, dark place for 2 to 3 months. So it does last a pretty long time. Most winter squash does last a while because of that thick skin. You know, I know some of us have seen people who keep their Halloween pumpkins on their doorstep until, January, February, and they're not rotting. That's because, yeah, those winter squash, they last a long time. Not that those types of pumpkins are edible. Those are really just meant for carving and don't really taste good. All right. We have another baking sheet here. And so what we want to do is actually put a little bit of oil down and the seasoning, and then we'll put the butternut squash on top, or the honey nut squash on top, and then add a little bit more oil and seasoning. Okay. Gonna flip back and forth to the recipe here. So again, we have the silicone baking mat so that it doesn't stick. You can use parchment paper if you don't have that. So I'm just gonna drizzle this lightly with olive oil. And then for seasoning, we're just doing salt and pepper. Putting some fresh ground black pepper on top there. And some salt all over. That just makes it a little easier to coat. And then we're going to throw the squash on. Again, just spreading everything out so that there's room for everything to cook. Get some airflow and get nice and crisp and browned in the ends. Things on the end tend to cook more quickly. So just like that. So I want to put the little slivers more on the inside and the bigger pieces on the outside, just to give them a little more time to cook and make sure that the little rings don't burn. So let's do a little drizzle, more olive oil on top, a little more salt and pepper. All right, and because we need this to cook quickly enough, we're just gonna throw it in the oven with the carrots. This is gonna be a little tricky because the carrots are cooking at 375. So we're gonna crank up the temperature. The carrot should be halfway done, so hopefully that'll just mean they cook a little more quickly. All right, so the carrot or the honey nut squash went in when the timer was at 10 minutes. They need to cook for 15 minutes, and then we're gonna flip each piece. So I'm gonna try to remember that. Once the carrots come out, if they're done, we'll set the timer for 5 minutes and we'll flip the butternut squash or the honey nut squash. Okay, so what we also need to do, I would normally do these steps together, but I just wanted to throw the squash in. We're gonna roast some shallots. So we're gonna make a little package with a piece of foil and just toss it on the baking sheet. So we have 2 shallots, and the recipe says just to cut them in half lengthwise and peel them. So I'm gonna off the ends there. And shallots are kind of like a mix between an onion and garlic. They have really nice flavor, smell good, and have a skin like onion. And again, these are going to go into the dressing. So they don't really need to look like anything in particular. They just need to be cut up a little smaller so that they can cook. And then we're going to put everything in the food processor. And it's actually really easy to make your own salad dressings. It doesn't have to be this complicated with the roasting of the shallots, but usually it involves oil and an acid. Usually the oil to acid ratio is anywhere from, it could be 1 to 1 up to 4 to 1, with 4 being the oil and 1 being the acid. So it depends on the dressing and how you want it to taste. Obviously the acid is going to make it tangy. So it could be vinegar, it could be lemon juice, lime juice. And then usually there is something from this allium family, like shallots or garlic in there. But it could just be some minced fresh shallot, it could be minced fresh garlic. It could even be garlic powder if you're short on time. Okay, so we have a little piece of foil with our shallots. We're going to drizzle that with olive oil and a little bit of salt for flavor. And then we're just going to make this little packet so that they can cook kind of steam in there. So we'll pack it like that, and we'll just throw it on the baking sheet. Right. Set this aside. Okay, so now we can get everything else ready for the salad. Well, actually we do kind of have to wait for the shallots to come out. So what we can do is get the pomegranate ready. So pomegranate is a little bit of work to get the seeds out. You can even buy them seeded. But they do make a dish kind of pop with color, with flavor, with juiciness. So it's a nice way to make your salads or all kinds of other dishes more festive. Um, and let's talk about pomegranate for a minute. Grab my notes so I don't forget anything. Okay. So when you're choosing pomegranates, you want to look for ones that are plump and round, don't have, oops, sorry, don't have bruises. If they have a natural split, I don't know if you can see that, that maybe is a little bit of a split. It's kind of brown there. That's okay. They don't ripen after they're picked, so, and they bruise easily when they're ripe, so they're often picked under ripe, kind of similar to something like bananas. So if you go to the farmer's market, they might be a bit fresher. So that might be a good thing to buy at the farmer's market if you have access to that versus the grocery store. These are actually from our manager's neighbor's tree, so I got these locally, so that was nice. A lot of people grow pomegranates around here, so maybe you have a neighbor who grows them, or maybe you have them yourself. And they can be stored on the countertop for 1 to 2 weeks or in the fridge for a few weeks or more. They actually kind of last a while. And then the seeds can be stored, once you peel it, they can be stored in the fridge for up to a week. So one pomegranate will usually provide about 3/4 cup of seeds. And for this recipe, we need about 1/4 cup. So you could just get a small one or get a bigger one and just use the seeds for something else. All right. So the juice is quite dark. And actually, let me dump this real quick. Use the other side because I cut shallots on the other side. I don't want that flavor on the pomegranate. So the juice is quite dark, which means that yes, there's a lot of nutrients and antioxidants, but also it can really stain. I'm wearing all white. I don't recommend wearing all white when you cut a pomegranate, so I'm going to add another apron so I don't stain my clothes. And hopefully I won't get it on my sleeves here. But I'm going to show you, there's a bunch of different ways that you can peel a pomegranate, but here's one of many. So what we're going to do is we're just going to cut off, actually let's do this then. We're going to cut off the top, but not too much. We don't want to cut into too many of the seeds. There's a few there. And then sometimes you can see, hopefully you can see on an overhead camera, it kind of looks like there's segments of an orange, and there should be 6. So I see one section there, one there, 4, 5, 6, something like that. So what I'm going to attempt to do is cut along the outside of the skin, lining up with the segments. If you don't get it perfect, that's okay. It doesn't really matter. There's other ways that you can do this. You can really just even break this thing in half and then just kind of tear it apart. So the idea here is that we're going to get, this will help it break more easily into sections along the segments so that we get more whole intact seeds. So you want to do this, you always want to cut away from yourself, right? So you don't want to hold this in your hand. These are kind of tough. You don't want to accidentally cut it and then cut through the whole thing and then hit your hand. So similar to cutting avocados, be careful. Don't cut it while it's still in your hand. Okay, so you can see we kind of got a whole segment there. And we're just gonna kind of peel the seeds out into a little bowl. Let's see if you can see this. So see, I have it in segments. That one didn't totally come off. Maybe I could have cut it a little lower. But if I open it, I got 2 segments there. And I cut a seam right there. So let's see if we can get it into 2. There we go. So you can see that broke along that segment. So lots of different ways to do this, but this seems to work pretty well. I'm not going to do the whole thing because we don't have that much time. And I just want to show you how to get at least enough for this recipe. Okay, so what about pomegranates? Like I said, these came from our manager's neighbor's tree, so they're local. So that means they are in season, right? So pomegranates are in season late September through November. So that makes them good for this holiday season in November. And then because they'll keep for a few weeks in the fridge, you could still use them in December through maybe like the new year. And they'll still be pretty good. Okay, that's probably enough for our salad. Maybe I'll do a little bit more. Okay, let's compost that. Okay, so we'll just save those seeds for later. Set that aside. All right, there is our timer for the carrots. So the carrots should be ready. So here we have, my head's in the way of the shadow. There's the carrots. Let's find out if they're tender by just sticking a fork in them. Yep, they're tender. They're a little more golden on the underside. If you wanted to, you could cook these a few minutes longer, give them a stir, but they look pretty good. They don't look quite as roasted, I think, because they probably would look a little more roasty on that flat sheet. Um, so maybe I'll just stick them in the oven for a few more minutes and see if they get a little bit more browned. I'll say the first time I made this recipe, I didn't measure the oil and I think I didn't use enough and they looked quite dry. The second time I measured it and did 3 tablespoons at the higher end of the range of what was recommended in the recipe. And uh, they seemed more wet, so I went with two tablespoons this time. So we'll see how it looks after a few minutes. All right, let me rinse my hands. They're kind of sticky after that pomegranate. I can't move with all these aprons on, so let me just take a layer off. All right, so while that is cooking, we can throw together our zesty garlic sauce for the carrots. Okay, so again, this is optional. You don't have to, but we're going to use a plain yogurt. And in order to keep this recipe totally plant-based, I'm actually going to use plant-based yogurt. This one is cashew and coconut. So just make sure it's unsweetened and plain. I think there are some yogurts that are plain but sweetened, and this is more of a savory application of yogurt, so you want to make sure that there's no sugar added because that will not taste very good. Oops, I forgot to measure. So I think this is, okay, 5.3 ounces. Let's actually measure just to be sure. I was thinking the container was half a cup. I don't actually know that. Probably going to be pretty close to half a cup. And if you don't need this recipe to be dairy-free or vegan or anything, feel free to just use regular yogurt. Yeah, so the one container, this is a 5.3 ounce container of yogurt, is just about half a cup. Okay, so we have our yogurt. If sometimes individually packaged things tend to cost more. So if you want to use the yogurt for other things, you could buy a whole tub that's like 4 or 5 servings, and then you'll have a little bit less plastic waste too. Okay, so we are going to move that there. And let's rinse this cutting board so we can use it for a couple of other things. All right, we're gonna add some garlic to this recipe. And if you're like me and you love garlic, um, you might be tempted to add more than what is called for, but when the garlic is raw in a recipe, I don't recommend adding more because raw garlic is really strong. So I would start with the minimum. The recipe actually, this recipe is goes along with them rockin' roasted carrots and is from Minimalist Baker. And the original recipe calls for 1 to 3 cloves of garlic, but I think that's a lot personally. So I'm actually gonna do like half a clove of raw garlic. Because keep in mind, this is only half a cup of dip. So start with less and then add a little bit more if you want. Okay, so we want to mince it up pretty small so that nobody gets a big chunk of raw garlic in one bite. So what we're going to do is just rock the knife over back and forth until the pieces get really tiny. You could also put it through a garlic press if that's easier, then you know the pieces will be small. Okay, so half a clove. That was from the outside of the head of garlic. The outside cloves tend to be bigger. So if you're, at the inside of the head, then it might already be smaller. So just kind of either way, start with less. You can always add more garlic later. Okay, we're also going to add fresh dill. So this dill I actually bought probably at least a couple of weeks ago. And what I did was I put it in a cup of water and put it in the fridge. And it was, before I put it in the water, it was really sagging and it spruced right up when I put it in the water. So this seems to be a good way to store it. And I already washed it thoroughly. And we need about 2 tablespoons of chopped dill. So what I'm going to do is just kind of peel the feathery leafy parts off of the stem and kind of estimate what would be 2 tablespoons once it's chopped. And 2 tablespoons is not a lot. I think made this recipe one other time with the same bunch of dill, so it is nice to know how to store it so that you can use it for something else. Dill is not necessarily a fall or winter vegetable, so if you can't find it, you could use dried dill. Um, you just want to use about half the amount that it calls for, about a tablespoon. Most dried herbs are a lot more potent per volume as compared to their fresh counterparts. So, rosemary, thyme, oregano, if you're substituting dried for fresh, usually you want half to 1/3 the amount. So that looks like just about 2 tablespoons. So let's just go ahead and throw that in there. So for example, if you need a tablespoon of fresh rosemary for a recipe and you're going to substitute dried, then you would want to use 1 teaspoon. There's 1 teaspoon in, sorry, 3 teaspoons in a tablespoon. Okay, let's take out the carrots. So those look a bit more browned, you can tell. You could also maybe broil them to get a little bit more brown. We're gonna take out the butternut squash or the honey nut squash and flip it. And the shallots should be done. Since we don't have time, I'm actually not going to flip the squash. It should get nice and browned on the underside, so we don't need to worry too much. So let's set that aside for now. And we need 1 to 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. So you can do this by taste. And usually, I think there's about 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. A lemon. Yep, that 1/2 was like exactly a tablespoon. Okay, and then a pinch of salt. And you can add a little pinch of cayenne if you want it to be a little spicy, but you can leave it out if you don't like spicy. And then we're going to stir that all together. And then you can just do a little drizzle of olive oil on top to make it a little richer and will be kind of like a garnish. You could also put a little bit more, maybe some cute little sprigs of the fresh dill on top as a garnish too. So you just want to get all the liquidy parts incorporated. So all that lemon juice. So it'll make it a little bit more like a dip, so it won't be so thick. Okay, so we'll just do a little drizzle of olive oil. And a little bit of fresh dill on top. Okay, so there we have our zesty garlic dip. Let's set that aside. And we just have 3 minutes left, so I'll try to get through this quickly. So here are our shallots, nice and cooked in their little package. You could cook them a little longer if you'd like, but they are just going to get whizzed up in the food processor. So if you wanted, you could put them on straight on the baking sheet so that they get a little bit more browned, but you don't have to. Okay, so we're gonna do a 1/4 cup of olive oil with the shallots. And this olive oil is nice because it has a little spigot, but it does take a little bit longer to come out. What else? And we're gonna do some balsamic or sherry vinegar and a little bit of Dijon. So we're just gonna toss those shallots in. Okay. And they're not totally obliterated yet, but I'm gonna keep going because we're gonna puree everything a little bit more. So 3 tablespoons. This is pretty dark. I'm gonna start with 2 tablespoons, see how it tastes, of the balsamic vinegar. And then 3/4 teaspoon of Dijon mustard. I'm just gonna kind of eyeball it. I almost always throw Dijon in my vinaigrettes because it kind of helps bind everything and gives it good flavor. And then salt and pepper. I'm gonna skip that. You don't really need to see that part. So that's it. You know, food processor makes it pretty easy. That's your dressing. I don't have time to quite assemble the whole salad, but if you can stay an extra minute or so, you can kind of get a little bit of an idea. So what I would normally do is toss the salad with about half the dressing right before you're ready to serve it. So if you're making this ahead, then stop there. So I would put that down. And put some of these pieces on top. There, you can see the other side has gotten browned. Whoops. Let's do a couple pieces there. And then some of the pomegranate. You can just kind of imagine how this would look. I have some dairy-free goat cheese and then some roasted and salted pumpkin seeds. And then that's it. So it's a little bit of extra work. You can just kind of imagine, the whole salad being done. Um, so those are our recipes for today. I'll stick around if you have any questions. You can also email me and I'll be sending out an evaluation. And our next class is going to be holiday treats in December, so I hope you can make that too. That will be in person as well as virtual. It'll be hybrid. So we hope to see you then.